Alright, so the main topic of this video is going to be the support shortage, but to get there, I think it's good to talk about kind of a little bit all things support. Two major reasons / motivations to make this video. The first one being the very obvious one is that this support shortage topic is something that is constantly talked about. It kind of goes quiet for a little bit and then it just comes back. I remember when Artist came out and everybody coped saying that Artist would fix the support shortage, and well, Lopang has never seen as many new employees as when that class came out. It was probably only like a 2-week span where there was a DPS shortage and then everybody they dropped it. And the other reason why I decided to hit a support topic is because of you guys, really. Well, more specifically, the comments in my Bible video. So a little shout out to you guys. It wasn't until I started looking through the comments that I realized how much support players actually look at the Bible and how much they see it as a way to improve. Because when I thought about that, it helped move some gears in my head when I was thinking about some of these topics I'm going to cover today. Now, when I've seen some content creators talk about supports, one of the big things I see in the chat is, oh my, this guy doesn't even play supports. Yeah, thanks a lot, Soups, for planting that in my head. But back on topic, I actually do play supports. I have a pretty good amount of time in all three of them, so in my roster, there is a 1580 Artist. I used to have a 1580 Bard in my roster, but it died for Soul Eater. And then my Paladin, I dropped off at around 1540. And the main reason why the Paladin fell off is just because it is a very boring class to play, but it also is super effective, which we'll talk about later. So the reason why I play supports, it's not because I think they're like pog crazy, super fun classes. In Vault and Vicus Lodge, I vividly remember just sitting in Party Finder for like an hour trying to get support, and there were times where we just gave up. So at that time, I played with 3 other friends, and we were all DPS enemies. Clown was on the way, and I decided to pick up some supports. So I picked up Paladin and Bards so I could at least do 2 parties, 2 groups with just my friends that I'm playing with. No pugging, no nothing. We could just go in, prog, and then have fun playing the game together. But that's kind of the thing. I never found playing a support to be like too fun. I just found it as a function, a role, or something I had to fill because the support shortage was that bad. I was willing to sacrifice 1 to 2 to my roster slots for supports just for the sake of making my weeks and time easier. And I have a feeling I'm not alone on this. I feel like a lot of people probably have committed to that mentality that like they're just doing it because this game is a 6 roster game and you just want to make at least one of yours easier because the value of a support massively outweighs bringing a support DPS. The truth is that support is the most important role in your party. Anything that is not extremely farm content is not worth running without a support. The game is made around having support in your party, and it's essential, and that's why they can get away with so much, which is our next topic. Besides the first 2 weeks of Artist release, supports don't really know what it's like to be gatekept. When it comes to Party Finder and trying to find like DPS, for example, there's going to be so many other DPS you had to compare with that not having the +1 on your 5/3+1 might make the difference. Having 1 lower level gem might make a difference. Demon damage or whatever card damage, card bonuses and stuff like that. There's so many different things to say, I'll take this guy over that guy. But because we're so down bad for supports, we'll take supports with lesser engravings, lesser gems, maybe not even have full gems. Point is, you can be extremely cheap on these characters and still get away with it. This is why when a lot of people ask for recommendations of what class they should play when starting the game, a lot of people are going to say, hey, make a support. You won't have this grouping problem as everybody else does. And because there is such a shortage, people are more willing to forgive a support's mistakes or not even bring them up. Like really, as long as you're hitting all your skills on cooldown, it's enough for most parties to just be fine in every raid. On top of that, support classes will have or encourage to run heavy armor, which also makes things like learning and progging a lot easier for a newer player on a support. So because of this shortage, we've just been conditioned to accept any support for whatever they do and how good or bad they play. And the thing is, there actually is a pretty huge difference in the floor and ceiling of what a support can bring to the party. In those comments I talked about earlier, those very religious people I mentioned, there were people saying that DPS mirrors don't matter that much for damage people because how much support brings is going to make the difference. It's support diff. And it's pretty easy to tell when your support is paying attention versus not if you played with a pretty good support. Most DPS players are going to notice when their numbers are higher, and then there's also going to be the fact that you're not watching your HP bar as much because you can rely on that support. And just like those damage classes, uptime is super important. Poorly geared, a poorly optimized, whatever you want to say, support with incredible uptime is going to bring more value to the party than a super juiced one that is still double damage buffing at the same time or missing their skill shots. Paladin is just so good because there's like very little room to fuck up on this class. Both your damage buffs have no skill shot, no placement or anything like that. You just pop them. They only really run one shield skill, and that one has a tripod spot for a small heal at the end. So they're not juggling two different shield skills to try to get 100% uptime, or at least as close to it as possible. And on top of that, they remove the decision making from using your ult. You know, you have all things in your ult built into one. So you have a damage buff, you have a heal, you have DR all on there, as opposed to a Bard and Artist, which had to make the choice if they want to do a heal or a buff. Because the floor is so high on Paladin, I've come to value having a Paladin in my party more than anything else. I would say it's almost even a 3-to-1 that I see a Paladin in the MVP screen over any other support. The difficulty in playing a support is very, very different from anything else in the game, because the big thing is you're keeping track of 3 different things that you're trying to get 100% uptime on, and then making these choices on how you want to use your specialty gauge if you're not playing a Paladin. It's never just been anything that's just super fun to me. It's been something that I don't hate, but I don't really love either. Every support is going to run 1 or 2 marking skills. This gives a 10% damage bonus to whatever is marked. Then we have the attack buff, which is 15% scaled on the support's damage, if I recall right. Then we have shields and DR, and then something to note on these first 3, so marking, shields, and attack buffs. You're trying for 100% uptime in this. Then of course it's the heals and the buffs that get off their specialty gauge. Then on top of that, they run the Yearning set on their classes, which brings in its own heaps of bonuses, and people build their classes, their builds and all that stuff around a Yearning set being part of their party. So now I think we can really start talking about the shortage. It's a pretty simple concept. You have 4 party slots and you need 1 spot for support, and there's just not enough. This results in parties of 3 or 6 waiting to get a support for up to hours, while a support can basically just choose how jacked of a party they want. Smilegate has acknowledged that, hey, this is absolutely a thing and we are trying to work on it, but we're not quite sure what we're doing. They do know that support doesn't feel that fun or rewarding. You don't feel any better or stronger as a support upgrading, and like playing Vulcan back in the day at launch doesn't feel too much different than doing a con now. So I think it's extremely easy for the support experience to get really stale and boring. So this kind of results in players not really caring about gearing or over gearing their supports, doing kind of hard, for example, on 1580 on item level versus 1600 on a support. It's probably not going to feel too much of a difference for the support players, so why would they ever really want to super juice it? But the wild thing is, even though they might not feel it, the party absolutely does feel it, because again, things like shields, they scale off the bard's HP. The buffs will also scale off their attack power as well. The support isn't likely to notice this stuff as often as a damage player would. You know, they're not seeing the damage numbers that they're affecting. And if they notice that they had to heal more often because the shields aren't powerful enough, they're probably just going to think that they're playing with a bunch of bozos who are just goblins. So before getting into my ideas, I want to talk about a different idea. As you probably know, Memorizer made a video talking about the major problems with the game, and a big one that covered a lot of the video was support shortage. So his idea was pretty simple.
They should delete the supporters and redistribute the supporters' offensive and defensive party synergy to remaining DPSs, like all 25 DPS.
A pretty wild concept, but I'm gonna be honest, it's been like what, 7-8 days? I still can't stop thinking about it. So mentally I ran with that concept. I thought, you know, what would it do? So earlier we talked about the support kit, we talked about what they bring to the party. So as a quick reminder, that is marking, attack buffs, shielding, DR, heals, and again their specialty gauge, which is more of any of those. If we were to split up those major roles, we would have like 4 different categories. We'd have marking, we have shields and DRs, we'd have attack buffs, and then we have healing. So if we redistributed those 4 things to different classes, that already is kind of a problem when you think about it, because those are 4 different roles and you only have a party size of 4. So instead of having one specific role you need to fill in one party slot, you now have a role to fill in every party slot. So instead of 4, they would probably just bring it down to 2. So you would have a offensive person, so somebody that does marking and buffing, and then a defensive person that does shielding and healing, and also DR. But still, you're running into a situation of you're trying to fill 2 specific roles, 2 different slots on your party. And how similar this would be to a support shortage would have to really depend on how many classes they would distribute this out to. Because if it's only like 3 or 4 different classes that have the defensive properties, then yeah, we're probably going to be not too different than our current support shortage. I should also mention that in Memo's ideal world here of deleting supports, those classes would not be deleted, and those would just be turned into DPS classes. So I'm sure there'd be a lot of happy paladins out there. So let's talk about the double-edged sword aspect. Let's talk about the negatives this could bring, or really just consequences. The first one would be the obvious. There are people who enjoy the current way supports are played, and that's perfectly fine. But with this change, you would completely get rid of what they enjoy about the game. But let's think about the work that it would take to do this, because now you're talking about in changing how parties work, how the game has been designed and balanced. since forever. Everything is designed to have this support. Everything is designed to have one less DPS and one support. If you make everyone a DPS and semi-support, then you're just completely messing with all the numbers and design of it. Everything has to be rebalanced. But you could also argue that balance patches and new classes already screw up the balance quite a bit for older content. And it's more than just inflating boss HP. There's class redesigns and stuff like that that have to go along with it. Like all these bonuses that a support brings, these would have to be embedded into other skills. Nobody wants to be like War Dancer, wasting 2 slots for synergy buffs. You'd be watering down and diluting classes, and if they were automated, and just say example that you get attack buff when a igniter source pops igniter, the average damage of an igniter source is going to go jump way up because now they're always getting a damage buff when they pop igniter. And obviously not every class is going to have a damage buff, so that means there's going to just be those certain classes that always have that buff on, and like they're just using it selfishly for their own damage as opposed to for the party like a support would. They would also have to rework how sets work and probably incorporate yearning buffs into something else, or somebody just has to take a yearning sacrifice, I guess, in the party. Ultimately, this would kind of lead to a balancing nightmare. Running a party with like 1 attack buffer and then 3 people that are constantly topping shields, it would probably be pretty ridiculous and just invalidate a lot of things. Ultimately, I think it would homogenize the game a bit too much. There was already like a lot of people who come from general MMOs that aren't happy that there's not really a true tank role in this game. There is no holy trinity, it's just damage and support, and now we would be getting rid of support. And that kind of balance and game design can work because ironically, Vindictus is basically the same way. Every class is a DPS class. There are 2 classes that offer like heals and stuff like that. It's not a huge amount of healing, but it's not really a route that I would like to see Lost Ark take. Maybe. So now we get to move on to my ideas. Now the reason why I wanted to talk about a lot of those topics before is so like why I play support, the support difference, the reason why people don't feel it's good gearing it up, leveling up, the difficulty, and just overall playing it. Those were basically the catalysts for my ideas, so that's why they were important to talk about before, along with what the very religious people say. So starting off with the offensive buffs, I think a support should be able to see the fraction damage that all their buffing and everything is enabling. So all the damage caused from the marking, all the damage caused from the attack buffs and the meter buffs, letting a support have the option to toggle those on and off and probably change their colors so you can actually understand who's doing what without seeing their full damage. This gives them a clear idea of how much their damage buffs are contributing during the fight. There is a little bit of a flaw with this, as you know, they're probably not going to be playing with the same people every time, so there's not going to be too much consistency with the damage as opposed to seeing the numbers on a DPS class, because you know your general range of damage, but a support player is not going to know the general range of damage of all their party members unless you're playing with a static. Then you would definitely get the same feeling of improvement between them and you. So I wouldn't say it's as effective as seeing your own damage as a damage class, but it still kind of just shows, like, gives you the feeling that, hey, I'm helping, this is what I'm doing. Something like this could potentially help people want to hone their support, because then they're going to actually see the difference that their damage is going to bring. Because remember, attack buffs scale off the support's attack power. And since we are talking about buff tracking, let's talk about buff and debuff tracking. I think having a dedicated space that over a boss's heads or over your allies' heads, seeing that when buffs and debuffs are on them to track them would be a really good thing to have. Have them fade away as the buff is fading away, or have like a little timer on it, something to indicate that the buff is applied and it's running out soon. This is something inspired mostly by World of Warcraft add-ons, and to me the goal of it is to keep the players focused right in the middle of the screen on what's going on, as opposed to, hey, looking up top, seeing the marking, looking at the bottom, looking at your own skills, looking up to whatever side you have HP bars, but you already do kind of look hopefully in the middle for the HP bars and shielding, because you can toggle that on for your party members. So with the HP bars and shields above the person's heads, with the attack buffs above their head, and then also the marking on the boss, you have a steady idea of everything that's going on without really distracting yourself and focusing on the fight and what's right in the middle of the screen. Now, when it comes to defensive things like shields and DRs, that's where it got a little more tricky to think about. The first thing I thought about was the support medal, saving somebody from attack that would have killed them. I don't know the name medal, and I swear there's a way to look at the medals you've gotten in the past, but I just don't know. I looked at the menus and I couldn't find it. But my idea is giving players who do something like that, or even just overall shielding, how much damage they shield, give them some sort of reward for being proactive, saving people and stuff like that. So I think maybe like a little bit of a meter boost, something like that, which rewards players for being a little bit more active. Because if they're getting like meter boost, for example, for doing this kind of stuff, being really good at their defensive stuff, they're going to be able to also pump out more damage buffs, and everybody's going to notice that, and that's going to kind of feel a little bit more support diff for people and motivate support players to learn and try a little harder, as opposed to playing it as a class you're playing just to fill the role. And the reason why I think shielding should be a part of this is because it would incentivize people to hone their armors more, because shielding is a percentage of your HP, which is going to come from armors. And then kind of to meet Memo halfway here, I think turning those other engravings that supports have into a DPS support wouldn't be a bad idea. And I'm going to use WoW as another example and another inspiration, which is the Discipline Priest, which the core concept is that it heals for a percentage of the damage it deals. A DPS support like that wouldn't really be like the kind of person, the kind of character that would be doing like cruel fighter damage, for example. It would be a fighter kind of area, but it gives people who play supports for their role, but maybe don't really enjoy playing a support, the option to play it as basically a DPS with extra things. And I think everybody's been in a situation once before at least, where everybody got smoked and it's just a support left. The boss has one bar, and even if that bard or support had 10 minutes, they wouldn't be able to do that one bar. In that situation, that support would be able to finish off that boss. It would take a little longer, but they would actually still be able to have that clutch and bring it through. I think it would be pretty nice to have the ability for a support to salvage a botched run. Now, obviously their healing, their support values that they bring wouldn't be as good as somebody playing the normal support engraving, as to not invalidate the other supports, but still bring something unique to the party and just a different and probably fun play style for a lot of people who just don't enjoy normal supports. Now, all these things that I thought about, they would require some rebalancing and some retuning, especially if they were to do like the DPS support route, which is why I don't think they would ever do that, just like I don't think they would ever do like the whole delete support thing. But I think this kind of concept, this kind of way of thinking, this kind of way of addressing these major points that people talk about that are a malice to the class, something that people don't want to deal with. The class doesn't feel fun, it doesn't feel rewarding, it doesn't feel like anything changes. May you be level 14, 15, or level 1580, 1600, whatever. So I think adding some damage numbers, adding some bonuses for shielding properly, for DRing right, and adding UI elements to make the class a little less tedious on looking all over your screen for buffs, I think all these would be great. But because of the major reason I have stated before, that it's going to cost too much time for them to rebalance everything for a huge shift in game design, I don't think we'll ever see any major changes until basically Lost Ark 2, or if we're, you know, Copium here, it's season 4, tier 4, because at that point they would have an excuse to invalidate older content. I just wanted to talk about supports for a little bit because it is the most important role in any party. Ultimately, for the majority of players, it's not really a fun class to play. It doesn't feel that rewarding. And then there are people who play it like me, who just play it as a class for an easy character on your roster, but in a perfect world, you would absolutely dumpster this character. If there was no support shortage, there would be either a perfect suppression right there in that slot on my roster, or probably a war dancer. But yeah, I actually do enjoy talking about this kind of stuff, not to get too personal, but I have a pretty useless bachelor's degree in game design. So if you like my content, like and subscribe. I think by the time this video posts, I'll have 700, so we're on our way to 1,000. And I might have Taco Bell money from YouTube with your help.